Good evening and welcome to the Paxmundi show. I'm your host, Nigel, and tonight we'll be starting with stories of war, peace and resistance from around the globe, and then our main feature story will be the landmark trial of Rios Montt, former Guatemalan dictator, for genocide and the implications of that trial case. So, starting with the news, in the US, in a tragic twist to the Boston bombing narrative, a former associate of Tamerlane Tsarev, the dead Boston bombing suspect, 27-year-old Ibrahim Todashev, also of Chechen origin, he'd been an associate of Tamerlane's while he was practicing martial arts in Boston. Tamerlane had been an amateur boxer, and that was where they'd hooked up. So the FBI claimed that Todashev was arrested for on May the 4th and charged with aggravated battery with bodily harm. They claim that he's already confessed to being involved in a drug-related killing of 3 men in 2011. This happened in Waltham, Massachusetts, and that he carried that robbery and subsequent killing with Tamerlane Tsarev. Now, after he'd confessed to all of this, the FBI then claimed that he started to get violent and lunged at an FBI officer. Although he was unarmed, they promptly responded by shooting him dead. So clearly, that's another loose end tied up somehow there, and another confession obtained that nobody can argue with. In related news, the CBS reported this week that the surviving Boston bombing suspect, Dzhokhar Tsarev, had written a message inside the boat in which he was hiding from the authorities. He'd written a message detailing his, very conveniently detailing his motives for the attack on the inside of the boat. He stated that the motive for the attack was in retribution for US wars in Muslim countries. Staying in the US, the US government this week admitted to killing 4 US citizens through drone attacks. US Attorney General Eric Holder told congressional leaders that they had assassinated Anwar al-Awlaki and that he was a legitimate target. They meanwhile claim that the other 3 victims, which presumably includes Anwar al-Awlaki's son, 16-year-old son, Ibrahim al-Awlaki, were not the intended targets. So the statement, coming as it does, appears to be an attempt by the government to legitimize their extrajudicial killings, by openly admitting them to Congress, and this is in clear contravention of all international law. These people had had no trial, there'd been no evidence presented, and they were guilty of nothing. So over in the UK, Just yesterday there was a tragic event in a premeditated attack, what appears to be a premeditated attack. A British soldier was attacked in the streets of Woolwich, South London, with a knife and a meat cleaver after being knocked down by a vehicle. There are several different videos being circulated in which the perpetrators of the killing give their motives for carrying it out and blame the British government. The incident is likely to escalate the increasing Islamophobia in the UK. The EDL, a far-right anti-Muslim organisation, responded very quickly with demonstrations and riots in London and throughout the country. Moving over to Lebanon, there's been increasing violence between different ethnic groups in Lebanon, principally the Sunnis and the Alawites. This has escalated with fighting in Tripoli this week, with 7 people being killed and over 50 wounded in fighting between these different armed groups. And the motive there is their allegiance to the different protagonists in the current Syrian civil war, with the Alawites clearly supporting the government of Syria and the Sunni militias supporting the opposition resistance. Over in Niger, in North Africa, in the African Sahel, the ongoing civil war in Mali is now spreading to neighbouring Niger. There were 2 car bombs detonated there this week. The one inside a military base in the northern town of Agadez. The insurgents rammed the explosive-laden vehicle into the military compound and then launched an armed assault on the military base, killing 20. The other bomb went off at a remote French-operated uranium mine near the town of Arlit. That bomb killed 7 and injured many more. The movement for oneness and jihad in West Africa claimed responsibility for both of these incidents. The movement, Mujeo, are one of the groups which seized power in northern Mali in the wake of the Tuareg insurgency there, and they are one of the groups which is currently still resisting the French intervention along with ECOWAS African troops. So this is a clear escalation of the conflict in Mali and spreading war in the Sahel, which suits the purposes of the US and France in order to spread their occupation of Africa. In a positive development, meanwhile, in Mali, the Malian government has now stated that they're now prepared to start negotiations with the Tuareg groups who originally initiated the insurgency due to the Mali government's refusal to negotiate with them over rights for Tuaregs and the issue of autonomy in the north of Mali, in the region of Ouazzad, where the Tuaregs are a marginalised majority. So that's all the news for tonight. Just a couple of notices. That a reminder about the massing for Brad on the Saturday the 1st of June in London. That will be at the US Embassy, and that's in support of Bradley Manning. More information from wiseupaction.info. And the demonstration will be being supported by David Rovics. David's a protest folk singer from the United States who's going to be on tour here in the next few weeks. He's doing gigs in London, Brighton and a few other places. Just to let you know that there is now a Manchester date for his tour. That will be on the 11th of June, and that will be at the Night and Day Cafe on Oldham Street in Manchester. And I think the tickets are about £8. I'm certainly going to be going myself, and I'm hoping maybe I'll get the chance to do an interview with David Rovics. Meanwhile, our main story tonight is about the landmark case of the prosecution of the former president of Guatemala, Rios Montt, for genocide. Now, these charges of genocide relate to the period when Rios Montt was a military dictator in Guatemala from 1982 to 1983. Now, during that period, and indeed after 1954, when the US CIA overthrew the democratically elected president of Guatemala in 1954, because he was doing things that the corporations didn't like, particularly the United Fruit Company, which had big stake in Guatemala. He was introducing labor laws and improved conditions for workers, and also reforming land ownership, and therefore the CIA overthrew him, and he was replaced by military man Colonel Castillo. And then there were a number of successive military dictators throughout the 1960s, 70s and 80s. And this was, of course, all with the support of the United States. Now, Rios Montt himself, he was actually a fundamentalist Christian. That's really just for information, because it puts some background to his his crimes. So during that period, there were insurgencies by a number of left-wing guerrilla movements across Latin America. And There were resistance groups in the highlands of Guatemala. Now, these areas were inhabited by mainly indigenous people, and the people that were targeted and identified in this particular trial were the Mayan exil people. These are people from the Mayan ethnic group, and they were living up there in the highlands of Guatemala, where the insurgencies were taking place. And the policy of the government was that the indigenous population had been 100% indoctrinated by the left-wing resistance, and that therefore they needed to be exterminated. So over those 17 months of his rule, the army carried out a program of extermination. They would go into villages and kill everybody who hadn't escaped. They would use different methods. They would usually rape all of the women. They would kill the children in front of their parents first. Stories of them swinging children around and smashing their heads, and then they would, when they had killed everybody, they would then burn the village down. And this went on throughout the whole region, village after village after village. Now, the reason that all of this was documented was that there were actually some journalists out there who went to actually provide a record of what was happening. One notable investigative journalist was somebody called Alan Nairn, and he documented a lot of these atrocities, the evidence that he saw of these atrocities. Eventually, he had to flee the country to save his own life, but he's also now, 30 years later, been covering the trial of Rios Montt. One of the local indigenous people who was responsible for bringing much of these crimes against humanity to the attention of the world was a woman called Rigoberta Menchú. Now, Rigoberta she's actually a Nobel Peace Prize winner. She's one of the few who actually deserves that title. Rigoberta was actually a Quichua Indian, someone from the Quichua or Quichua ethnic group. Now, her family were from of a background of opposing the military dictatorship. Both her father was assassinated, her mother was raped and killed, her brothers were killed. When the army came into their area, all of Rigoberta's sisters went with the guerrillas up into the mountains, but she made a decision that she would stay at the family home with her mother, and to take the fight up at home, and she subsequently, her mother was killed after being raped. Rigoberta did escape and went into exile in Mexico, where she started to organize for the Guatemalan opposition and also to document the atrocities that had been carried out in Guatemala, particularly under the rule of Rios Montt. Most recently, Rigoberta actually stood for the presidency in the most recent elections. She, of course, didn't win. The winner was Perez Molina, a former military officer, formerly known as Colonel Tito, who was actually involved in carrying out these atrocities. So this trial has been going on over about the last 2 months, and there's been a lot of delays to it. At one time, the hearing was suspended by the Constitutional Court, which is the final court of appeal. That the Constitutional Court is actually the highest court in the country, and they suspended the proceedings, but the judge Yasmin Barrios eventually overruled that and continued with the case. So the trial did proceed. What I will say is that there has been a lot of pressure obviously put on the Constitutional Court to try to stop this case even being heard. So because of the implications of the case, the implications for others who were involved in those atrocities. So 2 weeks ago now, the former president, Rios Montt, was found guilty of genocide and crimes against humanity. He has subsequently appealed against that. He then collapsed. He is actually an old man. He's now 83 years old. This is often the case with many of these war criminals that, they are into their elderly years by the time they're ever brought to justice. You'll remember that was the case with Pinochet. So he did collapse at one point and had to be taken to hospital. When the guilty verdict was actually read, he actually tried to flee from the courtroom with his lawyers and had to be actually arrested and brought back. So since then, he's actually been in the army hospital for health reasons. That's where he's been detained. And he was sentenced in total to 80 years. That is a 50-year term for genocide and the 30 years for the crimes against humanity. Now, after the verdict was announced, the judge, Yasmin Barrios, also directed that the case of the whole case of the crimes against the Mayan people should be further investigated, and that everybody who is implicated in that should be brought to justice. Now, unfortunately, in a delayed hearing, appeal hearing by the Constitutional Court, they have actually agreed to annul the whole trial verdict. So for the last week they've actually been considering this, and eventually just on Monday the Constitutional Court came to a decision with a 3-2 majority to annul the verdict of the court, to annul the whole case. So that is the position at the moment. Clearly, that is what the establishment wants. That is what the United States wants, and that is what the current government of Guatemala, President Molina, wants, because all of these people are implicated in these war crimes. So, as I was saying, Perez Molina was actually involved in that. He was actually interviewed by Alan Nairn back in the 1980s when these atrocities were being carried out. But the implications are not just for the people in Guatemala, but also for the US and for the reputation of the United States. At this time, when these atrocities were carried out, it was Ronald Reagan who was the US president, and you'll be familiar with many of his other activities, with the Contras in Nicaragua, the atrocities that took place there, that government support for the death squads in El Salvador. Now, some of these things have been documented, but there's really been no culpability by the United States, and this is, I think, where the case needs to go. We need to, look at who was involved from the United States, and retrospectively hold President Reagan to account. Now, Reagan, by aiding, abetting and encouraging and in covering up these widespread human rights crimes, whether it was in Guatemala, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, they actually bear more responsibility for these crimes than the people who are actually carrying them out at their instigation, like Rios was. Now, despite all of that history, Ronald Reagan has never been, his reputation internationally is really untarnished, and even Obama, has continued to carry on that tradition, really, of not speaking ill of the dead. So let's look at the link between the US and what happened in Guatemala. Now, The evidence is clear that Reagan and his top aides gave the green light to this extermination campaign against the Mayan exiled people in the highlands of Guatemala. This was happening even before Rios Montt came to power, despite the fact that US intelligence reports had actually revealed these atrocities. They knew what was happening and, ostensibly what was being done in their name. For example, in military planning documents conceived by Rios Montt's government, they had written that the leftist guerrillas fighting the government had succeeded in indoctrinating the impoverished exiles, and that had reached 100% support. So that was the justification for everyone being targeted in this scorched earth campaign that eradicated over 800 Indian villages in these Guatemalan highlands, killing over 177,000 people, men, women and children. That was the scale of these atrocities. So a document that was discovered in the archives of the Reagan Library in the Simi Valley in California actually revealed that Reagan and his national security team in 1981 had agreed to supply military aid to Guatemala's dictators so that they could pursue the goal of exterminating not only, quote, Marxist guerrillas, unquote, but people associated with their, quote, civilian support mechanisms, unquote. This is often the case where there are insurgencies, that the populations who live there have nowhere to go. They, they will be made to the scapegoats, really, for the insurgents. Now, this supportive attitude for these atrocities took shape as Reagan made the change from the previous relatively liberal Democrat regime of Jimmy Carter. And as a part of that, the State Department, quote, advised our Central American embassies that it has been studying ways to restore a closer cooperative relationship with Guatemala, because during the Jimmy Carter regime, they'd actually stopped supporting the Guatemalan dictators, or certainly the State Department and Congress had. It's most likely that the CIA had continued as they do. So the document adds, State believes a number of changes have occurred which could make Guatemalan leaders more receptive to a new US initiative. The Guatemalans view the new administration as more sympathetic to their problems, and they are less suspect of the US role in El Salvador. Now, further goes to say, state has concluded that any attempt to re-establish a dialogue with Guatemala would require some initial condition-free demonstration of our goodwill. So here we have clearly a situation where the Reagan government was courting the Guatemalan government there of Rios Montt, and doing this without any preconditions about human rights or the way in which they carried out their internal conflicts. So what they were looking to do was, really just get the Guatemalan dictators back on board as a partner with the US. The checklist added that the State Department has also decided that the administration should engage the Guatemalan government at the highest level in a dialogue on our bilateral relations and the initiatives we can take together to improve them. That at the time was Secretary of State Alexander Haig. He designated General Vernon Walters as his personal emissary to initiate this process with the Guatemalan government. So what was said is that the US state is prepared to give assurances that we will take steps to halt government involvement in the indiscriminate killing of political opponents and to foster a climate conducive to a viable electoral process. The US will be prepared to approve military sales immediately. So the operative word in that paragraph was indiscriminate, because the US government, the Reagan administration, had no problem with killing civilians if they considered them to be supporters of the communist guerrillas. At that time they made no bones that the only commie, a good commie, is a dead one. So if they were considered supporters of the guerrillas who'd been fighting against the military dictators, then they were considered to be legitimate targets. So the distinction was spelled out by General Walters in a face-to-face meeting with the President of Guatemala during a White House talking point. The President and Secretary of Haig designated Walters as their personal emissary to discuss, to come to an agreement with the Guatemalan government. Now, he states, both the President and the Secretary recognize that your country is engaged in a war with Marxist guerrillas. We are deeply concerned about externally supported Marxist subversion in Guatemala and other countries in the region. As you are aware, we've already taken steps to assist Honduras and El Salvador to resist this aggression. He further goes on to say, the Secretary has sent me here to see if we can work out a way to provide material assistance to your government. By that they clearly mean arms. We have minimised negative public statements by US officials on the situation in Guatemala. We have arranged for the Commerce Department to take steps that will permit the sale of 3 million worth of military trucks and jeeps to the Guatemalan army. With your concurrence, it continues, we propose to provide you and any officers you might designate an intelligence briefing on regional developments from our perspective. Our desire, however, is to go substantially beyond the steps I have just outlined. We wish to re-establish our traditional military supply and training relationship as soon as possible. And it continues, as we are both aware this has not yet been feasible because our internal political and legal constraints relating to the use by some elements of your security forces of deliberate and indiscriminate killing of persons not involved with the guerrilla forces or their civilian support mechanisms. I am not referring here to the regrettable but inevitable death of innocents through error in combat situations, but to what appears to us a calculated use of terror to immobilize non-politicized people or potential opponents. It continues, if you could give me your assurance that you will take steps to halt official involvement in the killing of persons not involved with the guerrilla forces or their civilian support mechanism, we would be in a much stronger position to defend successfully with the Congress a decision to begin to resume our military supply relationship with your government. In other words, this was really an appeal by General Walters that they really knew about the behavior of the Guatemalan military. They were happy to embrace the scorched earth tactics against the indigenous people who they had decided were involved with the insurgency, with the left-wing guerrillas, and who they considered to be their civilian support mechanisms. The way in which that played out in Guatemala, like in El Salvador, was that the massacring of the peasants, the indigenous people in those regions which were considered to sympathetic to left-wing insurgents was okayed by the US government, by the Reagan administration. So US intelligence officers in Guatemala at the time were well aware of what was happening, and they did keep the Reagan administration informed about the expanding slaughter. For example, according to one secret cable from April 1981, which was later declassified in the 1990s, the CIA was confirming Guatemalan government massacres, even as Reagan was negotiating with Walters, through General Walters, to loosen the ban imposed by Congress on providing direct military aid to the Guatemalan government. For example, on April 17, 1981, a CIA cable described an army massacre at Kokop, near Nebaj in the Ixil Indian Territory, because the population was believed to support the leftist guerrillas. A CIA source reported, quote, the social population appeared to fully support the guerrillas, and the soldiers were forced to fire at anything that moved, unquote. The CIA cable went on to state that, quote, the Guatemalan authorities admitted many civilians were killed in Kokop, many of whom undoubtedly were non-combatants, unquote. For information, many of the Guatemalan documents declassified in the 1990s can be found at the National Security Archives website. I'm sure these probably are also available through WikiLeaks. Despite these known atrocities, the Reagan administration continued this farce of negotiating with the Guatemalan government over the issue of human rights embargoes on military equipment, which had been imposed by President Carter and the Congress. So according to a State Department cable, October 5th, 1981, when Guatemalan leaders met again with General Walters, they left no doubt about their plans. The cable said the president, that is the Guatemalan president, made clear that his government will continue as before, that the repression will continue. He reiterated his belief that the repression is working and that the guerrilla threat will be successfully routed, unquote. So the human rights groups at the time saw this situation in the same way. They were aware of what was going on. For example, the Inter-American Human Rights Commission released a report October 15, 1981, blaming the Guatemalan government for, quote, thousands of illegal executions, unquote. That was reported at the time by the Washington Post. Yet the Reagan administration continued to whitewash the situation in Guatemala, and the State Department released a white paper in December 1981 blaming the violence on leftist quote, extremist groups, unquote, and their, quote, terrorist methods, unquote, promoted and supported by Cuba's Fidel Castro. So what the documents from the Reagan library made clear is that the administration was not simply inefficient or, struggling to find out what was happening in Guatemala, as the US press tended to report that the US government was not aware of these things when they later surfaced. But they were clearly on board with this mass slaughter, with this genocide. And so US intelligence agencies, a CIA report in 1982 February described an army sweep through the so-called Ixil Triangle in the central El Quiche province. Quote, "The commanding officers of the units involved have been instructed to destroy all towns and villages which are cooperating with the guerrilla army of the poor, the EGP, and eliminate all sources of resistance. Since the operation began, several villages have been burned to the ground, and large number of guerrillas and collaborators have been killed." The report went on to state, quote, "When an army patrol meets resistance and takes fire from a town or village, it is assumed that the entire town is hostile and it is subsequently destroyed. When the army encountered an empty village, it was assumed to have been supporting the EGP and it was destroyed." So here we have very clear prima facie evidence of US government complicity with these war crimes. And, this is part of the resistance in Latin America, where these war crimes are being exposed and where these war criminals are being brought to justice. Hopefully Rios Montt will end his days in prison for his crimes, but on a wider scale we also need to be looking at those who paid and promoted this, who benefits. So that's all for this week. I hope that that's been a useful topic study, and look, please tune in again next week. I'm not sure exactly what the topic will be, but we'll be keeping an eye on current events, paying particular attention to reports from Telesur TV News, Pan American Telesur TV, which generally has a very progressive news stance. So please tune in next week, and we'll have more stories of war, peace and resistance.
They said we could not do it. They said it wasn't possible. But we did it. We created a free radio station to bring the people together and spread an alternative message from the mainstream. They tried to silence us. They tried to hack us. But we carried on. You cannot silence the truth. You cannot enslave freedom. You cannot stop a good idea. You cannot stop Darkcity Radio. The crew is now eager and stronger than ever before. We will not be kept off the airwaves. We will continue. This is not our radio. This is your radio. This is Darkcity Radio.
This is your Darkcity. This is your Darkcity.
This is your Darkcity.
This is your Dark City.
This is your Dark City.
This is your Dark City Radio.